what is creativity in the city? How can a city be creative? Maybe what's the role of markets? I mean, if you're going to look at, for me, if you're going to look at creativity, whether it's the culture industries in a city or just urban fabric, I think the person to look at is Joseph Schumpeter, the economist, the Austrian economist, who isn't a straightforward, less straightforward neoclassical than many other economists, and he has an idea, of course, of creative destruction. But also, I think most interesting is his ideas of innovation. But his ideas of innovation are not on a creation model. They're not on a God created the word model at all. It's basically you use it's almost a found object model of creativity, almost a Duchamp thing, in which you use found objects and found things in space. You use whatever resources are lying around and you put them together and you make something. Whether you're a capitalist, for him it was the entrepreneur who was a risk taker. I mean, the entrepreneur lived in a space of uncertainty all the time for Schumpeter. So I don't like the word creation, I like the word invention better, or innovation. And in that case, what you're doing is you're using what's at hand rather than ex nihilo kind of God model of creation. So I mean, I think that we do want to look at Schumpeter for sure. I think we've lost a lot of the Schumpeterian drive right now. I mean, some people would say we've gone from creative destruction to destructive destruction, in the economy. And I mean, then we might want to look at people like Hayek, because Hayek is an incredibly important figure. He makes a transition between neoclassicism and neoliberalism. Yeah. So neoclassical economics is something, that is born with Menger in Germany and others, way different to classical political economy of Karl Marx and many others. And then neoclassical economics becomes neoliberal. We have Milton Friedman, but before Milton Friedman, you have Hayek. Yeah. And Hayek is an Austrian. And the early neoclassicals were all Austrians too, as we know, the Austrian school. Yeah. And Hayek and the Chicago School of Economics, which Hayek was connected to, is the Chicago School of Law and Economics all the time. There's always a strong state with them, not a weak state like Adam Smith. So in a sense, the kind of urban nightmare is a Hayekian nightmare of kind of a strong state, a neoliberal model, the destruction of welfare, yeah, the destruction of kind of a welfare city, the destruction of kind of a much more social democratic city or a socialist city through clear and distinct property rights. That's the neoliberal neoliberal credo. So I think that and in some ways I like to see Schumpeter much more around the kind of innovation in the city, and Hayek around markets, but it's not just markets. It's markets and law. It's markets and a strong state. So the question is, how do markets work? What are markets? That's a difficult question. I mean, there's kind of a classical notion, almost kind of a Newtonian notion of reproductive markets, which does come from neoclassical economics. What did Adam Smith mean by a market? It's something different, I think, yet again. But we'll talk about that for the moment. But what I'll do is I'll say that that we don't have to think of markets like that. There's a very original sociologist called Harrison White. And Harrison White, who wrote a book called Networks and Markets and Networks, and a number of other books from Columbia University in the States, he understands markets as spaces in which producers signal to each other. They signal to each other in terms of price and quality. And markets are spaces in which one person's always trying to get a monopoly of that market. Schumpeter knew this. Yeah, Schumpeter knew this. And I think that these markets are much less linear. They're spaces of process. Yeah. But markets in a weird way are also, they have to be spaces of security, believe it or not. Because if markets weren't spaces of security, people wouldn't invest. There are spaces of perhaps risk, but there's got to be certain levels of security for people to invest. So markets are hugely complicated, complex phenomena. You can't just say supply and demand and there's a market. Markets grew out of country fairs and all sorts of things hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago in the West. Markets grew out of the classic German, a guild city. The modern city came out of the guilds and the German Rathaus. In fact, one of the originary theories of democracy came from there. In fact, Preuss, who was the author of the Weimar Republic Constitution, started writing about guilds in the city, in the medieval city, and this is so important as the origins of democracy. In some ways, Germany had it first and best. I don't want to be too nice to you Germans, but so I think what's interesting is that markets are very complex things. From growing out of the guilds to what they are now. I mean, in China, markets don't function like they do. I do a lot of work in China, in the West. They're security. China, you do invest in China, but it's not a straight market model.